Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to just give everyone a few seconds to load in from the lobby, and then we'll get started to kick off this workshop. All right, I think most people are here, and in the interest of time, I will get started. Thanks again for joining us today. My name is Amanda Hansen. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at California's Natural Resources Agency, and running point on the update to our state's natural and working lands climate smart strategy. And this workshop is really focused on how to ensure that that update reflects the best and most up-to-date information on how our forests can support California's climate change goals and how our climate change goals can support our forests. We kicked off this sort of public process to inform the draft natural working land strategy with a webinar a couple weeks ago, where we really did a deep dive on sort of the evolution of our administration's policy in this space. We also walked through the 2022 strategy to really kind of remind everyone this is the approach that we took when we released this first strategy. And then we also did a deep dive on some of the proposed changes to our approach as we think about the updates to the strategy, which is it was called for in AB 1757, and it is due in January of 2025. So, whoops, I skipped housekeeping. I'm going to interrupt myself. Apologies. Just flag a couple things. First is just to please stay muted when others are talking. Second, we are recording this webinar, and we'll put it on our website. So feel free to share and flag for others in case they couldn't be here today. And then lastly, if you would like access to closed captioning, you go to your meeting controls at the top right of your screen and select More. And then from there, you select Language and Speech. And then from there, you select Turn on Live Captions. So please write in the chat if you have any challenges with that. Apologies, I should have started there. So if you are interested in, listening into that deep dive on the evolution of our policy and our approach to the 2022 strategy, we will be putting a link in the chat now to a recording of that webinar. The focus of today's workshop is really to do a deep dive on forests, and specifically, we're very keen to hear from you. So we'll have a short presentation that essentially walks through the approach in the 2022 strategy to forests. And then we'll update kind of we'll share some thoughts with you all on how we're proposing to update our approach in the 2025 strategy. And then we're going to want to turn to listening mode, where we'd really love to hear from all of you. What changes would you recommend? Where could we do better? We have a bunch of discussion questions for your consideration. So that's our agenda. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Clessy to both introduce herself and get started with that presentation. So thank you all again. Oh, I forgot to say something. Sorry, second forget. I wanted to just say, when we did the 2022 strategy, the recommendations that we received through public comment and engagement with people who have deep expertise and experience on all of the various landscapes in California was just invaluable. And so I just want to, number one, express our appreciation for those of you who contributed to the 2022 strategy, and say that we are very hopeful to have that same level of contribution for the update to the 2025 strategy. So with that, I will hand it over to Clessy, and thanks again.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna share my screen. Are you able to see the slides? Great. All right. As Amanda said, my name is Clessie Bennett. I am an senior environmental scientist at the Natural Resources Agency. And I'm going to kick off with a little bit of background on our approach to updating the strategy. So the heart of the 2022 strategy were these landscape sections where we laid out the climate benefits and potential that climate smart management of these landscapes could provide, as well as a list of priority nature-based climate solutions. So we're going to retain these sections in the 2025 update and update each of them with the latest science, as well as any refinements that we want to make to the priority nature-based climate solutions based on changes in management, changes in the science, what we hear from you. Second, we'll be integrating the latest land cover data into our landscape maps. You may have noticed in the 2022 strategy, we have a number of maps on the various land cover types as well as by region, and so we'll be updating those. Third, we will be taking the next step in outlining our approach to tracking action and measuring outcomes. We really started our first step in the 2022 strategy, and so moving from there. We will have a new section in the 2025 strategy on identifying barriers to implementing the priority nature-based climate solutions and how to overcome them. And we're really hoping that you all can help us build out that new section. And then lastly, we'll be summarizing our progress to date from the 2022 strategy to the 2025 update, including new programs and policy that has happened since. We'll also update our near-term priorities for action going forward from 2025. So next, I'll talk a little bit about the process of updating the strategy. So as Amanda mentioned, we had a kickoff webinar last week, and now we are in the midst of holding landscape-focused public workshops. Today, we're at the forest workshop. We'll also be offering an opportunity to provide written input for folks who aren't able to make the workshops. We're also doing early tribal consultation and holding roundtables with tribal governments. At this time, we plan to release a draft of the strategy in June, and that will be followed by a public comment period, more tribal consultation, and additional tribal roundtables. And this will all culminate in publishing the final strategy in January 2025. So these are the dates of the upcoming landscape workshops. All will be held from noon to 1 p.m. We had our first one yesterday, grasslands. We'll have another one tomorrow on sparsely vegetated lands, and Friday we'll have one on seagrasses and seaweeds. All right, so now I will dive into the forest section from the 2022 strategy to jog our memories. So for this strategy, we define forests as those landscapes that are covered with 10% or more of live tree canopy cover. This includes conifers and hardwoods, as well as riparian forests. These forests cover approximately 27% of the state, and as you can see from the map on the screen, are largely concentrated in the North Coast and Sierra Nevada region. The ownership breakdown of forests is largely split between the federal government, managed by the U.S. Forest Service, and private entities. Climate smart land management of our forests and healthy forests can provide many benefits to the state, as Amanda alluded to, including sequestering and storing carbon, protecting the state's water supply, providing habitat for California's biodiversity, supporting tourism and other economic opportunity, largely in our rural communities. However, forest health is threatened by a century of fire exclusion practices and policies, historic harvesting methods, and the threat of climate change. And this has really led to an increase in large, high-severity wildfires. So in 2022, we identified a number of priority nature-based climate solutions. And these included protecting forests and large resilient trees, proactive vegetation management, including beneficial wildfire on the landscape. And as was alluded to on the previous slide, this might lead to an initial decrease in carbon stock in forests in order to retain long-term carbon stability and resilience. We also have nature-based solution around post-wildfire reforestation, one on protecting and restoring riparian forests and reconnecting aquatic habitat in forests. And lastly, a priority solution on advancing voluntary cultural easements to ensure cultural burns and tribal access to these landscapes. Next, I'm also going to touch on our cross-cutting priorities that were included in the 2022 strategy. So we included this list of cross-cutting priorities that was really meant to span all of our landscapes. In our strategy development in 2022 and through the public comment phase, we realized that there were several different actions and priorities that spanned all of these landscapes. So we created this standalone section to really capture those. So I'm not going to read what's on the slide here, but I will just mention kind of the themes that were reflected throughout these priorities. And that includes equity and engagement in implementing nature-based solutions, advancing multi-benefit and landscape level approaches, ensuring adaptive management as we implement these solutions, providing technical assistance and providing workforce development opportunities, leveraging resources and partnerships, partnering with California Native American tribes for tribal management and co-management, protecting and conserving lands that are resilient, that provide refugia, and other ecosystem services, including carbon storage, advancing durable protection measures, addressing invasive species, and lastly, expanding nursery and seed bank capacity to ensure that we can meet our restoration and reforestation goals. So next, we're going to shift over into the discussion portion of our workshop today. So I have a few guidelines as we move into this part of the workshop. First is to please use the raised hand function if you want to speak. We'll call on you in the order that you queue up. If you are going to give a comment, please introduce yourself. You can also put input into the chat. We'll get to as many of the comments that we can at this time, but if we aren't able to get to you, please email us your comment or place it in the chat. And as Amanda said, this is really the opportunity for us to hear from you. So we're really interested in what you have to say on some comment or on some questions that we've prepared. And those are these 4 questions. So first, are there changes that you'd recommend that we make to the existing priority nature-based climate solutions on forests that I just walked us through? Second, are there changes to the existing cross-cutting priorities that you'd recommend? 3, what are the biggest barriers to implementing these nature-based climate solutions? And what solutions exist to overcome these barriers, and how might we at state government most usefully advance them? So at this time, we're going to open it up to public comment and input. If you could raise your hands, or if you want to put your input into the chat, that is also fine. We'll be capturing that. All right, first we've got Joseph.
Hi, everybody. My name's Joe Harvey. I'm with the California Tahoe Conservancy. Yeah, I just had one comment on number 3 here, biggest barriers to implementing some of these nature-based climate solutions. This one's not new. I'm sure you're all aware of it, but our biomass issue of how we address our forests and what we do with that biomass. There was a really cool program by the Department of Conservation really trying to forward carbon negative technologies to develop facilities that can actually utilize this biomass, but again, capture and sequester that carbon. I believe that was unfunded in the budget cuts. So trying to find a new solution that's going to be something that's long lasting and that'll meet the state goals will be huge for the forestry and trying to restore our forests. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I will also note that there is a comment in the chat about whether a recording of this meeting will be made available. And yes, we will post that on our website. All right, next I have Doug.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. It's Doug Turk from the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District. I'm the Program Forestry Manager here. So regarding number 3, a few things that come to mind. Funding, of course, is always an issue to get work done. So can never have too much money, and there's a lot of acreage to treat. So I don't have a specific answer to that other than I'm sure everybody feels that pain. Streamlining CEQA compliance. Is another one. We have the Cal VTP PEIR process, which helps, but it's still a bit, it's quite a bit of work. And so if there's a way to streamline some of these practices even beyond that, I think would be helpful. And then another one comes to mind with so much land and private ownership. And I know in Mendocino County, a lot of that is with, Mendocino Redwood Company, for example, or timber companies. Encouraging them to transition their practices to thinning from below and leaving the larger trees, which sequester more carbon, are more resilient to climate change and fire. And that costs money for them, right? And so is there a way to encourage them through some kind of program to take smaller trees out, because that costs more money, and leave the bigger trees behind? And I know it's a big ask, and there's a lot to that, but it's something we're looking at in Mendocino County, and just want to put that out there as an idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe.
Well, since no one else is talking, I'll go again. Wow, now I'm having a brain fade. Actually, I need to think about it again. I'm sorry, guys. I'll be right back.
No problem. Next we have Nadia.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. On the vein of the last comment, I support those ideas as well. We also have forest inventory data showing that private industrial lands actually have the highest amounts of gross growth and carbon. They have the highest or second highest carbon sequestration rates Obviously, that active management and keeping some amount of forest in younger, fast-growing trees has an effect on carbon sequestration rates. And so there's a balance between the rate of sequestration and the storage in the forest bank. And so just being mindful that policies kind of weigh those balances and figure out, how we can basically leverage our forests across all the lands and all the ownerships to, be most beneficial. We're also showing, we haven't put out the new FIA data yet, but we're also showing, massive losses on national forest system lands. All the mortality from the droughts and the wildfires of the last decade are starting to show up in the data. And so there's obviously some opportunity there to improve carbon sequestration rates and storage. And then again, balancing the amount of late cereal, old growth forests on the landscape with early and mid. So just being really cognizant of policies that don't limit us in terms of creating resilient forest structure and composition as we try to meet some of these goals.
Great, thank you. Next we have George.
Can you hear me okay? So dovetailing a little bit into what Nadia just said, a lot of people talk about like transitioning into thinning from below on I'm sorry, I should have added Senior Vice President, California Forestry Association. So a lot of people talk about thinning from below, and that is a useful tool for reducing overall fire impact. But the purpose that we serve is that we grow high quality wood products from our trees that are desired by the public. A lot of these smaller trees have very little use. They're low value wood products, and we don't really have anything to use them for. It ties back to the earlier question of biomass and other low value type products that we could utilize those things for. As it stands right now, we have to grow saw timber in order to make our operations work. Also, on the larger scale, our industry basically has to follow CEQA, the Environmental Endangered Species Act, and assorted environmental laws in order to create biodiversity. In fact, if you look at companies like Green Diamond, they have many agreements, habitat conservation plans, and the like, in order to maintain these species. In essence, they're the epitome of a working landscape that creates these habitats and creates the products that the public desires. The real issue in terms of our overall forested landscape is the federal ground, which is over half. And unless we're going to address how to manage those lands, which lack a lot of active management, we're kind of like behind the 8 ball here. The private lands are aggressively managing, reforesting their lands. The federal land base is lagging way behind, and as Nadia pointed out, those numbers are starting to show up now. Thanks.
Thanks, George. Next, we've got Alfredo.
Good morning, everybody. This is Alfredo Redondo with Resolute here in Sacramento. And I know many of you have already heard me talk about this issue, but just wanted to reinforce Joe's comment from the Tahoe Conservancy around the potential for new technologies and processes to be able to take a lot of the unutilized biomass, the forest residues from forest health projects, et cetera. And specifically to get a little bit more granular, I think it's worth exploring further alignment between existing programs that CARB oversees, like the low carbon fuel standard and the compliance offset market under cap and trade, and seeing how some of that can be expanded and better aligned from a policy perspective to ensure that there are incentives to the market that can actually be part of the solution and therefore drive additional funding without the state having to necessarily be on the hook for the funding itself. Because as we see here, you know, DOC got cut, I think close to 40 million just in the proposed budget alone, which I think finding some creative solutions there might be worth exploring. And then I did have a question, and then really just, it gets back to a fundamental question about how these goals interact with the broader inventory of carbon that we now have to develop for carbon neutrality's sake, and how we meet the carbon neutrality goal. I think understanding what we're trying to achieve there from a fossil fuel reduction perspective, but now that we're implementing natural working lands into the same framework, are there distinctions being made between biogenic carbon and fossil fuel based carbon? I think that's a broad question that I've been asking folks, and I don't think anybody has a clear answer just yet on that. So I figured I'd ask it here as well. Thank you for the time to comment.
Kevin.
Thanks. Kevin Conway, I manage CAL FIRE's Demonstration State Forest Program. And so we actively manage our lands using the same tools and regulatory structures as a private landowner would in the state. And I'll be kind of following up on some of George's and Nadia's comments here, but I think recognizing the significant guardrails that are in place in forest management in the state and the multidisciplinary, state review process that we have helps us get through a significant barrier that I think we have, which is that just general public misunderstanding of how much thought and long-term thinking goes into forest management from all of our landowners. And I think, a key audience for that is really those smaller private timber landowners, which I think, maybe Nadia called out, is suffering from a lack of management. And they're one of the key targets that we have for transferring our information that we develop from the management of our state forest is how do we get those landowners to, regularly participate in forest management so that those forests are not just healthy now, but they're healthy long term. And, I think a big part of that really is that we have a steady supply of materials coming off of those forests, whatever that is that those landowners decide is appropriate for their goals for their forest management. But collectively, as a group right now, I think those smaller landowners aren't regularly participating in the markets. And so you see the infrastructure and the workforce we have that's capable of doing this work is really targeted towards those larger forest landowners that are regularly participating. And I think, part of that is, a little bit of a social barrier or like a misunderstanding of forest management and a social acceptance of forest management from, their neighbors. They're situated more in neighborhoods. They're probably living on their forest land. And so, the fact that you can have a commercial project and do wildfire reduction and meet your, biological goals, I think is a important message to have in here. And, and potentially strengthening the linkage that we have to the state's, climate smart building materials, right? So this is where we are getting those. It's coming from a sustainable forest, it's meeting our goals there. And really, wood is celebrated pretty widely once it gets into the architectural or construction realms, and the state recognizes it, in those plans very well. And I think, making sure that we have that linkage that it's also coming from sustainable forests, in our state is just an important message, I think, maybe for the state to be sending to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Joe.
Hi again. I remembered what I was going to say. Sorry about that before. Yeah, just another one again, number 3, a barrier, and specifically for biodiversity and how our forests support biodiversity. I believe we still have a lack of data for connectivity. here in the Tahoe Basin, as we were implementing several projects, we quickly realized we didn't have that understanding of how species were moving through the basin and how we treat these forests may impact how different guilds of species are there. The Conservancy has recently funded an on-the-ground connectivity project, very large, intense amount of cameras and tracking. And we're really trying to identify that will help inform how our forest is restored, where we should keep forests thicker, where we can really be more aggressive to meet for community protection goals. It's a costly study, and we're doing that just at the basin scale. But somehow finding a way to take the course data that we currently have that's modeled for the connectivity, how we can get that more refined, more to the on-the-ground scale, so we can really help inform managers make those right decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Peter.
Yeah, hello. Thank you. My name is Peter Jackson. So I'm serve as Vice President, General Manager for Green Diamond Resource Company. I did not come here in cohorts with George Gentry, but appreciate his comments. But representing a private timber company, we manage about 400,000 acres here in northwestern corner of California. And we, echoing Joe's comments, those kinds of studies are business 101 for a timber company. I think the key when I hear about how do we perpetuate and find solutions to a lot of these items is to create a system that can operate in the red and doesn't have to, or excuse me, operate in the black and doesn't have to constantly be funded with state money in order to succeed and perpetuate itself. I think also getting the idea out there to the community that it takes active forest management to create healthy forests that can provide a variety of ecosystem services, not just carbon, but also wildlife benefits and water quality benefits throughout the system, I think is a key message. Biomass was touched on by several individuals. That's a problem all across the state and how to dispose of material. A lot of that's done with burning to reduce slash loads, or you have different facilities trying to get rid of residuals from the lumber process. For smaller projects that are fuel treatment related, often it's masticating and decaying or doing small pile burning. The need is definitely there for something that can utilize the small material in a more efficient and effective manner that's definitely less polluting. So we struggle for that. We struggle to find solutions for that also. And it's not just about growing healthy trees, but you also have to have roads and infrastructure, loggers, the support networks and workforce behind you in order to help maintain and keep these forests healthy. So I think that's something to also recognize. And much like some of the other comments, we're surrounded by federal forests, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there to create some more resilient forests that are better adapted to handle some of the crises that we're currently facing. And just my last comment the comment was made about encouraging thinning from below and keeping large trees. Those work in some areas, shaded fuel breaks. But at times those large trees are also slowing down and in their growth rates or topping out, and then tend to have a higher rate of decay also. So I would say it just depends on the situation and the unique area that you're working. It's not necessarily a solution that would solve all problems, just thinning from below. Oh my God.
I'll just echo something that Amanda said at the onset, is that in the 2022 strategy, conversations like this really helped us improve and refine the strategy. And so we really appreciate any thoughts that you may have on these questions or otherwise. And don't be shy. Please speak up. And again, if you want to submit stuff in writing, that's also fine. Nadia. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I don't want to keep talking, but since there was the silence, I figured I would pipe in again. The other thing I want to just mention here is that any policies that we develop in this state, we just really need to be cognizant of leakage. And we already import a lot of wood products into the state. About 2/3 of our lumber supply and more of the other products that we're using. We're getting that mainly from Oregon and British Columbia. And those forests are also facing major climate change impacts from disturbance and wildfire, insects, and disease. And so, the future wood supply in general that we have available to us is shaky at best. So we just need to be aware of that. If we develop policies where we want to reduce wood supply from our own state, we need to think about where that wood is going to come from, because we do still use wood products. I don't say this to be like pro, cutting down all the trees. I just want us to be mindful of the decisions that we make in our state, because it has repercussions on other forests. And we all just want forests on the landscape to be healthy and resilient across the board, whether it's in our state or in British Columbia or Oregon. So just consider that as you make policies.
Next, I've got Rich.
Thank you. I'm Rich Walker. I'm with the Fire and Resource Assessment Program, FRAP, of CAL FIRE. And we're working on the 2024 FRAP assessment of forest lands and rangelands. And in that context, we have a relatively new hire, Sam Evans, who's on the webinar today. And he and I have been going back and forth on his work on the rural economies. And I just kind of want to underscore, at least in more remote areas, maybe not Tahoe, but the whole sort of economic revitalization that's kind of needed to bring people in to do the jobs that the forest industry wants, or other people want to be able to do the work and to use the materials coming off the land in a way that sequesters carbon. It's a more systemic, sort of deeper look, I guess, at the barriers, shall we say, in a lot of places. And I know that people like SPI, and they've talked about this at the Wildfire Resilience Task Force meetings, getting people to take these jobs, and there's a lot of vacant jobs that could be helping the land in this vein, but getting the people to those locations might need some incentivizing. I guess that's what I want to say. Thank you. And Sam, you're welcome to join in. I didn't mean to rattle your cage. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we've got John.
Yes, hi everyone. John Anderson, Humboldt Mendocino Redwood Companies. The couple of the items that have been discussed here about importing so much of our wood, and it just got me thinking about the permit process we have here in California. We've got the most stringent regulations when it comes to forest management. Not saying necessarily a bad thing. We have some very good rules that ensure sustainability and protections for all the resources that we like out of the forest. But the permit process for this, a 400-page EIR, or at least a functionally equivalent to an EIR, when other states have very minimal paperwork type of process. And we have two other permits that we need to obtain also. The first one is from CAL FIRE, and then the other two are from Department of Fish and Wildlife and the regional water boards. And if we want to continue to have private investment in California in these forest lands, this is certainly at the top of the list of what scares people away from buying timberland in California, managing their timber, hiring people in rural areas. It all comes together in the fact that it's a very lengthy review process on top of the lengthy document. And so why not go to other states? And now we're importing lumber from areas that have much lower standards than we have here in California. So I would just encourage all of us to look at the review process of these permits and see if there's some way of streamlining these processes. All three permits are duplicative, and the timber harvest plan, like I said, 350 to 400 pages. Certainly we ought to be able to streamline that somehow to incentivize investment in California forests. Thank you.
Carissa.
Oh, yep, there we go. Hi, I'm Carissa with People, Food, and Land Foundation. One of the things that we talk a lot about in relation to all of the different lands in California is the soil health. And I think that that's something that easily gets overlooked in any category, but especially with forests. And it would be really amazing from our standpoint if there were a few things that have kind of been mentioned. One is having maybe there's, a fast track way that you can get through some of the different applications for CEQA and all of those other regulations. If you don't have this and this and this, you can do the shorter application or something like that, because it does make a lot of restoration projects difficult for both private and nonprofit, for-profit, any of those combinations. It's hard to get a project going because of the high regulatory environment. And also additional support for projects that are really trying to keep things local. So we're trying to use the local forest biomass to create this soil amendment that's going to help this nursery have more seeds that go back into the forest, right? Really looking at a circular bioeconomy and correction, because everything is connected. And I think we've all listen to different pieces of, yes, this is great here, but it doesn't necessarily work here. We need a slightly different solution on this front or this front. And really being aware as you go through this that everything does have a ripple effect. And so looking at the holistic of how we can ease the pathway into doing more bioregenerative products that really are going to help heal our whole landscape, that is both the lands and the food that we eat, the people, and then back into how we're caring for our lands and what that relationship really is.
So we're coming up on our 10-minute mark here. Amanda and I will stay on the line if anyone thinks of anything. But I did just want to bring back up the slide of our future workshops. Carrying on tomorrow with sparsely vegetated lands and running through the end of the month. And as I mentioned, if you have colleagues who are not able to join today and want to give input, let them know that they have until the end of the month, and email can be sent to our nature-based solutions at resources.ca.gov email address. First, I don't know if your hand is up for an additional comment or just from before.
No, just from before. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Leslie, I just wanted to flag Nadia's request in the chat to put a link to the doc with the existing nature-based solutions. Okay, great.
Yeah, I can stop sharing my screen and put that in really quick. So that document pulls out all of the priority nature-based climate solutions and the cross-cutting priorities that were included in the 2022 strategy. I see your hand up. Maybe not. All right, we're at the end of the hour. Thanks for joining us. And I hope to see you at one of our future workshops.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.